I'm Camarillo City Council member Charlotte Craven, and I'm going to talk to you about Camarillo police stations. In 1958, President Dwight Eisenhower established Law Day, May 1st, as a day of national dedication to the principles of government under law. With this in mind, it's a good time to talk about Camarillo's police stations. Back in the day, there was an elected constable and one deputy sheriff. Al Rouse, the husband of Tweety Rouse, was the resident deputy from 1953 to 1960. John Murphy was the last resident deputy. I believe that J.C. Cam Ellis was the last constable. These people all had one thing in common. They operated out of the trunks of their cars. By the way, Ellis Terrace, an apartment building owned by the Area Housing Authority on Temple across from the Boys and Girls Club, is named after Cam Ellis. Shortly after the city incorporated in 1964, the new city leased space from Pleasant Valley School District in what Stan Daly called the only old building left on the site of Pleasant Valley School at 2222 Ventura Boulevard. It had 600 square feet of usable space from which all city services were run, including the police department. By 1965, the city's first contract had been established with the Sheriff's Department for police services with a force of 10 deputies. In 1968, most city offices moved into a building at the corner of Palm and Chapel, the former Bank of America building, which has since been razed. Planning was in an outbuilding, and the police department remained in the old building in the school. After the new city hall opened on July 4th, 1976, the police department moved into the former city hall. I toured the new city hall that day, and I remember being told that the empty lot next door was reserved for the new police station. By the time I got on the council 10 years later, they knew the department needed more space. Bill Esty was mayor in 1987. By then, the empty lot next door had been converted into a performing arts pavilion by council member Mike Morgan and his Camarillo Arts Council. Mayor Esty appointed a blue ribbon committee to study possible sites for the new station. The committee came back with the wrong answer. The lot next door, the city already owned. That recommendation stirred many protests. The lot was too small. Carmen Drive was too busy to have police cars zipping in and out. It would be too noisy for the homes across the street as well as the adjacent LDS church, and so on. A second committee was appointed to rethink the first committee's recommendation. But before it reported back, we'd discovered serious financial problems, and all thoughts of a new police station were stopped for 5 or 6 years. 1992 was a fairly wet year. We were jolted into reality one morning when the Camarillo Daily News ran a front-page picture of Police Chief Ray Abbott sitting at his desk in his office, wearing a yellow raincoat with an umbrella over his head and buckets catching water streaming down through the ceiling. Shortly after that, Larry Davis, the assistant city manager, brought us a proposal from Frank and Dave White and Craig Mason for the city to buy their building at 3701 Las Posas Road for about $1 million. My mind was still back at the lot next door, saying that the statements about noise bothering neighbors across the street and nearby churches also applied to this building, and we already owned the lot next to City Hall. But the other council members thought that the new site was a fine idea, so we bought the building in April 1993. That could be the end of the story, but it wasn't. I'll tell you about the building itself and what happened next. The construction project was headed up by Larry Davis for the city and Sergeant Steve Lewis for the Sheriff's Department. We worked out an agreement that the city would buy, furnish, and maintain the building, and also provide space for deputies who worked the unincorporated area, while the sheriff would provide and maintain the antennas and other communications equipment. No rent would be charged. The building had been financed by a developer named Stu Aury. Although the building permit was taken out in 1981 by the Sonic Memorial Foundation, which, by the way, affirmed on the building permit that it was the owner-builder. At the same time, the city contracted with the county of Ventura for building and safety services. Camarillo Masonic Lodge number 824 held its first meeting in the building on November 4th, 1982, with Mr. Aury promising that he would deed the property to the lodge. However, the economy took a downturn and Mr. Aury rented it to the Masonic Lodge. Instead of giving them the deed, he mortgaged the building to pay for another development. When he died unexpectedly, the building went back to the bank, and the lodge's last meeting there was August 1984. The building sat empty for a while, but was bought from Valley Federal Savings and Loan by the Misters White and Mason, who did some alterations before operating it as the Bill Esty Community Center, renting it out for weddings, parties, and community services. It was never profitable, hence the offer to the city. An initial inspection was performed before we bought the building, which estimated that improvements would cost about $1.5 million, bringing our total investment to $2.5 million. The city was to pay for relocating the tenants as well as to pay off the liens. They would turn over the building in an as-is condition. An LA Times article reports that shortly before we were to close escrow, an additional $100,000 in liens were discovered. The council voted to go ahead and purchase the property at the higher price. That was an omen of things to come. Soon Mr. Davis returned to the council with a much more in-depth report of the condition of the building, which, you guessed it, showed that it needed more than the initial inspection had turned up. When wallboard was removed upstairs, they discovered the upper levels had not been secured to the first level, so it was really just 2 stories and a mezzanine sitting independently, one on top of the other. As construction proceeded, more was discovered. Sewer pipes had to be redone, electrical was not adequate for the usage, and more. As time went along, costs zoomed, and we issued a COP police facility bond for $3,150,000 in May of 1953. COP stands for Certificate of Participation, by the way, not for the cops who inhabited the building. The bond document states that we anticipated receiving construction bids in September 1993, with the opening to be in March of 1994. The final tally came to $4.5 million, almost double the estimate, and that didn't include staff time. It also took double the time before moving into the building in May of 1995. What caught everybody's attention at the 28,000 square foot building's opening was a large framed picture in the chief's office of Ray Abbott sitting in a yellow raincoat with an umbrella over his head and buckets catching the rain streaming down from the ceiling of the old station. The cost overruns and time delays might not seem like a big deal now, but I was frustrated. After having learned that we had lost all our money, an additional $6 million in 1987, we had just gotten even with the world again in 1992, and with no reserves, the expenditures seemed very high to me. While rates pay for water infrastructure and sewage treatment plant upgrades, police stations like roads and libraries have no income to offset the cost of repaying the bondholders. Additionally, by the time we finished, people in construction industry were hungry. There was very little building, and bids for later projects came in lower than the engineers' estimates. However, the building has served the people of Camarillo well. Neighbors say they feel safer with the police station nearby. It's located midway between eastern and western borders of the city on an arterial. And in the end, I think we made a good decision.